Am I the asshole for being truthful with my friends when telling them I won't go on a weekend away because I don't want to talk about marriage/babies for 3 days? I, 27 female, have a group of friends, 8 of us, and we have been friends for over a decade, since school. Now, we don't live in the same place, but we meet up a couple times a year for a weekend in an Airbnb. This used to be a weekend of good food, drinks, hot tubs, etc. I am content with my life at the moment. I am single, dating, and I don't know if I would like children. But in the event I did, I know I wouldn't want one soon. Around 5 of my friends, 5 out of the 8, are either married or in very long-term relationships. Of these 5, 2 either have a baby or are pregnant. I will be seeing all of my friends this year for various weddings, friend/baby events. I've been invited on this year's girls' trip. I have said I can't come. I didn't originally provide a reason. When queried in person by my friend, who is pregnant, I told her the truth. I'm not going because it's a massive financial expense for 3 days where we only talk about people's upcoming engagements, weddings, babies. I have a lot going on, but I feel a lot of my friends do not show an interest unless I talk about someone I'm dating. I also, last time, listened to one of my friends talk about her breastfeeding plans with vengeance for over an hour. She is not pregnant or even trying. Truthfully, it's boring and it feels dismissive. It's also a really expensive way to feel bad about myself. I made it clear when telling my friends this that I'm thrilled for them all living the lives they want, but maybe it's not the weekend for me at the moment. Meaning it feels like the group has 2 distinct life stages. I'm in the minority and it focuses on one stage. My friend has since told me she's really hurt and I'm not excited for her or our other friends. I responded saying I evidently was, from other actions, excited for them, but I just think this trip wasn't for me. I do have numerous other things going on, and to fit this in both my calendar and financially, it's a struggle. I just want to add for this friend specifically, I have gone on 3 weekends away for her wedding, and I am flying to go to her baby shower, all in the last 2 years. I have not asked her, nor has she wanted to fly to see me for anything in the last 2 years. So my question is, am I the asshole for being truthful with the reason why I can't go? Our OP does provide us a little bit of an update here.
Okay.
Just a few things to note in response to some of the general themes of response. I do show an interest in their weddings, engagements, babies, and baby plans. I am excited for them. I text about it. I ask for updates. I go to and help plan events for these things. My issue is 3 days of talking about this like it's the only topic of substance is not fun, especially when I don't feel an interest is reciprocated to me on my life. And point number 2, this is where it gets juicy. I have spoken to one of my other friends invited on the trip, who is also not at the baby stage of life. She is also not going on the trip, and she said she is not attending for the same reason. 3, the friend I expressed this to has apologized for her initial reaction and is still trying to convince me to come. I am not going to go, but I'm hoping she at least considers what I've shared. 4, I do have other friends in the city I live in, and they are a joy to be in the company of. Maybe this is because we became friends as adults and have more similar lifestyles. Who knows? Finally, some comments about me being jealous, hating myself, hating my life, etc. To confirm, dear strangers on the internet, I am content. Thank you for the concern, though.
Sad and disappointed on my 25th birthday, despite my boyfriend planning the whole thing. I feel guilty for being ungrateful. I feel absolutely terrible about this. I recognize it may seem entitled and ungrateful. I've scheduled a therapy session to discuss this issue, but I wanted to put my thoughts down here. My boyfriend and I have been together for 7 years, and he's a kind and considerate person. However, he's not the best at giving gifts and sometimes misses certain things. I recently turned 25, and I have expressed to him how important this milestone was to me. I've always been big on celebrating others' birthdays, and I usually go all out with gifts and celebrations. I didn't expect the same in return, but I didn't want to plan my own 25th birthday. My boyfriend agreed that I shouldn't have to plan it and offered to surprise me. I told him I didn't want anything big or fancy. I just want to spend time with my loved ones and feel loved by them that day. I didn't care if we all just went to a local soup dumpling place and had dinner and that was it. As long as my loved ones were all together celebrating my milestone age. Now some background on me. The last few months I've been undergoing therapy because I have an awful tendency of comparing myself to this one particular girl who caused me emotional trauma. I was jealous of her travels, of her boyfriend putting her on a pedestal, of her big friend group that used to be my boyfriend's friend group until she got everyone to hate him, of the cute birthday parties her friends and family would throw for her, and recently of her getting engaged. I've been trying to sort through this issue to always compare, but it kept coming back in the weeks leading to my birthday. I'd randomly break down over realizing I don't have people in my life who go through the same effort to plan things for her except my boyfriend. He's the one person who ever really put effort into making me happy and feel loved. but every now and then I'm reminded of my lack of community and I can't help but feel sad about it. I have my family and I do have friends, but none have really made an effort. More on that later. I've expressed these feelings to my boyfriend. We've talked about how nice it would be for this birthday to be different for me to not feel alone and instead feel loved by my family and friends. He agreed and would sometimes even hint that I am more loved than I know and that maybe I don't hear about plans because they're keeping it a secret for my birthday. He even alluded to reaching out to people himself so I could have a separate hangout with friends or family without me having to plan it. So I built this expectation in my head that either my family or my friends were planning something for my birthday. Keep in mind, I wasn't hoping for a party or a celebration or anything extravagant. I was just really thinking they'd plan a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just somewhere I can casually eat with my loved ones. And the great thing about that surprise was that I wouldn't have to be the one to plan it, that my loved ones would have taken the initiative to be there and spend more time with me. My birthday comes around and my boyfriend really did plan a whole day. He got me roses, he took us to a mall we frequent, and we rode the Ferris wheel that overlooked the city skyline. He took me to an exhibit we found out was in our area. We walked around a museum, then he took me to the nicest restaurant I've ever eaten at, and got me a custom ice cream cake with my favorite flavor of ice cream. It was a great day and I appreciated so much all the effort he put. Now comes the part where I was ungrateful and honestly a little hurtful to him. After that whole day, I kept thanking him for everything he did. But underneath me thanking him, it kept getting to my head that he was the only one who did anything. My family would have forgotten had I not reminded them. My family celebration was a last-minute dinner they asked me to plan, primarily focused on my sister's baby. Most of my friends forgot or asked me to plan something. I realized no one had anything planned. I mistakenly expected some sort of surprise and ended up with self-inflicted disappointment. So as I kept thanking my boyfriend, that gratitude turned into sadness because I realized he really is the only person who would make the effort. No one else did or would, and that was a really lonely feeling. He could sense my mood was shifting, so after we talked about it, I could tell I hurt him. His takeaway from everything I felt was that he wasn't enough for me, and despite him putting 100% of his effort in. This is where we established I needed therapy. Because when he said he put in 100% of effort, in my mind, I wish he had done more or done things differently. Because he planned a whole day for me, but what I thought was that he planned the wrong things. I felt guilty for thinking it. I was clear with what I wanted, which was just time with my family and friends that I didn't have to coordinate myself. I wanted to not feel alone or be reminded of my insecurities when celebrating my milestone. He had all of these big things planned. I love that he made the effort at all, and I love that he did make me feel special, but I feel like he got it wrong. It turns out he didn't reach out to anyone. He was just expecting they do something themselves despite me telling him multiple times in the past they wouldn't do that. I thought he'd help plan something for me that actually addressed the one thing I told him I really wanted. He gave me all of those other experiences, and as much as they did make me happy, I wouldn't have minded not doing any of it. I wouldn't have minded a cheaper, less eventful day as long as it had my loved ones in it. I feel horrible. I feel ungrateful for not appreciating what he did. At the same time, I feel frustrated that he missed the mark. He really does try. He just doesn't always do it right. And when I don't love the mistaken effort, it hurts everyone involved. I've told him multiple times I don't like roses. My favorite flowers are daisies. The mall he took us to is a mall we go to regularly. It's nothing special. The Ferris wheel was nice, but we've both talked before about what a waste of money it is to spend $30 a person on a partial view of the skyline. The exhibit he took me to was something I told him multiple times that I had been to already. He says he didn't know I'd already seen it. The museum was a kids' museum. The restaurant was nice. I wasn't lying about that. But like I said, I didn't need a fancy restaurant. He tries, but I also feel like he doesn't listen to me, and I feel awful for feeling frustrated because I'm now getting upset over the one person who even did anything at all for me. Everything I'm feeling is so conflicted, and I know the root of it is my own insecurities and inability to deal with many of those issues. We're not talking right now. We agreed to talk once I speak with my therapist, but I just overall feel horrible about everything.
The story time you've probably been waiting on. 22nd anniversary of my kidnapping. I want to share a little bit of a longer format of me telling my story my way. Be new here. My name's Kara Robinson Chamberlain. In 2002, when I was 15 years old, I was kidnapped from my friend's front yard by a man I would later find out is a serial killer. And this is my story. The background, the before, what my life looked like. Then make sure you go back and watch that. But let's just get right into it. 2002, I had spent the night with my best friend. We were always together, and we were trying to decide what to do for the day. We wanted to go to the lake, and so we called our friend who lived on the lake. We decided that that's what we were going to do for the day, but my friend wanted to take a shower first. So she had called her mom and asked if there was anything that we needed to do before we left the house for the day, and her mom asked that we water the plants. I wanted to take a shower. I volunteered to go out and water the plants for her. That was a decision that forever changed my life. I in my pajama shorts and my t-shirt and started watering the plants. And I noticed a car driving by on the way out of the neighborhood. I noticed the car because I was 15. I was getting ready to get my license, and I was paying attention to cars, trying to decide what kind of car I wanted to drive. So when the car came back into the neighborhood and pulled directly into the driveway, I took note of it. I remembered it because I had just seen it and I had actually paid attention to it, which wasn't always the case in a neighborhood. So there's houses all around. It's broad daylight. I felt safe. In the driveway, a man got out, average looking white male. I estimated he was in his 30s. He was about 5'10", like average height, maybe a little heavier than average, but he didn't look like anyone who set off any alarms for me. He had a binder in his arms and he said, "Hey, I saw you out here. I'm distributing these magazines, these pamphlets, and I would love to leave them for your mom or dad if they're home." And I said, "Well, this is my friend's house." And he said, "Okay, well, what about her parents? Are they home?" And I said, "No, her mom's not home right now." During this whole interchange, he maintained a respectable distance from me. There's no red flags going off at any point during this conversation. It was when he stepped in to hand me the magazine that things changed. I immediately felt what I somehow knew to be a weapon pressed to my neck. It was a small caliber handgun, and he pressed it in and he said, "Come with me." When I felt that weapon press into my neck, I immediately went into fight or flight. If you've never experienced this, it's automatic and you don't have a lot of control over it. So when he said, "Come with me," I went, "Stop." And he said, "No, you're going to come with me." He had his right arm around my neck. And so because the handgun was so small, it could not be seen by an outside observer. I walked with him to his car. I walked to the driver's side, and he opened the driver's side door, put the seat forward, and told me to get into the back seat. When I looked into the back seat, all I saw was the seat was filled with a plastic container. I said, "Where do I go?" He said, "Get in the container." So I did. I got in the container. He loosely put the lid on. He put his seat back, got in the car, shut the door, and drove away. I was lucky. My survival mechanism was to completely dissociate and stay calm. I inherently knew that I was going to survive. I had a gut feeling I'm going to survive. I'm going to escape. And I began praying that I would find an opportunity to do so. But in the meantime, I knew that I needed to gather as much information as I could to identify this person. I didn't care what his plans were because I knew what my plans were. I was going to find a time when his guard was down and I was going to escape. There was no question in my mind. But I had to have information about where I was, who he was, what he was doing so that I could help identify him. My fact-gathering mission began with paying attention to the turns that he was taking, trying to figure out where we were going. When I felt the car get onto the interstate, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to follow that route. And so I began trying to gather any other information I could, from the type of cigarettes he was smoking, the music on the radio, to the serial number on the inside of the bin that I was being held in. He drove for about 15 minutes before he pulled over to the side of the road, at which point he restrained my wrists and put a ball gag in my mouth and then closed the container completely. He drove a few more minutes and he got out of the car, picked up the container, and carried the container with me inside of it a short way before he set it down and drug it over a threshold into his apartment. For the next 18 hours, I was his captive. I was sexually assaulted multiple times. I was told that we were going to watch the news to see if anyone missed me. I was told that he was going to let me go whenever he was done with me. He was going to take me somewhere where I wouldn't know where I was, and he was going to let me go. And it was my decision if I went to the police or not, and if I was always known as the girl who was raped. Regardless of what he told me, I knew that I was going to escape, and I wasn't waiting on him to make the decision to let me go. And that was a decision that saved my life. At one point, when I was with my captor, he put me back into the container so that he could make a phone call. When I was in that container, I started to have an anxiety attack. He came in, he told me that I had to be quiet. I told him I couldn't breathe. And so he said that he would take the ball gag out of my mouth and he would take the lid off of the container if I promised not to be loud. I told him I would, and he also gave me a Valium around that time. And he continued his phone call after that. I later found out he was calling his wife that was out of town. Eventually, it was time for bed. The Valium had kicked in at that point, and my captor restrained me. He put handcuffs on both of my wrists. There was a quick link, which is like a carabiner with screw type clasp, that was around the middle of the handcuffs, and that was attached to a rope that was tied to the frame of the bed. And I had a leg restraint on my right leg that was also tied to the foot of the bed. So I was restrained for bed, and I eventually fell asleep. I always knew that while my captor was sleeping was probably my best case for escape. I imagined several different scenarios during the 18 hours that I was there that I would try to escape, whether that was trying to get one of his weapons and trying to fight him off, or escaping while he was sleeping. But when I woke up early in the morning the next day and he was still asleep, I knew this was my best case to escape. I always knew that while my captor was sleeping was probably my best case for escape. When I woke up early in the morning the next day and he was still asleep, I knew this was my best case to escape. I knew my first step was to get out of the handcuffs. I tried to squeeze my hands out, couldn't do that, so I knew I had to disconnect them from the rope. I tried to unscrew the quick link with my fingers, couldn't do that, and used my teeth to unscrew it. Slid my hands up out of the quick link, slid my hands down my body to my foot where I was able to disconnect the carabiner that connected the leg restraint, and slid out of bed. My captor remained asleep next to me the entire time. I went to the front door, and it was more or less barricaded with just stuff. I moved that as quietly and as quickly as I could, threw the door open, and ran. I just knew that while I was running, he was going to wake up, look out the window, and see me and shoot me in the back. But I also knew that I was out, and even if that happened, someone would see me, someone would hear what happened, and he would be caught. I ran across the parking lot of the apartment complex straight towards a car. I saw one car driving across the parking lot. I ran out in front of it. I waved it down. There were two men inside. I said, "My name's Kara Robinson. I was kidnapped and I escaped from that apartment." And they said, "What do you want us to do?" I said, "Take me to law enforcement." And they did. When I got to the regional sheriff's department, I ran in, didn't see anyone immediately, but heard a voice say, "Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am, can I help you?" and ran towards the voice. There was an officer sitting there at a computer. I told him, "My name's Kara Robinson. I was kidnapped and I escaped, and this is my story. This is my information." He began taking my information, looking for me in the missing persons report, and eventually he called my mom and had her come to get me. In the meantime, before my mom could get there, an investigator was notified. He responded. He took the handcuffs off of my wrist. At that point, I was able to squeeze one of my hands out. And so he took it off the other wrist, and he said, "Do you think that you'd be able to identify the apartment that you came from?" And I said, "I doubt it, but I'm willing to try." So he put me in his car. We drove to the apartment complex. As expected, they all looked the same. I wasn't able to identify the particular apartment. I knew it was a ground floor, left side of the building apartment, but that's about all I knew. While I wasn't able to identify the particular apartment, what I did have was a lot of knowledge I had gathered while I was in his apartment. We saw a man on a golf cart that worked for the apartment complex. We stopped him, and I gave him the information that I knew. This is what the man looks like. There's a woman that lives there that has long red hair. I knew that because there was a hairbrush that had long red hair in the apartment. There are a lot of animals in the apartment. These are the animals. This is the car that he drives. And from all of that information, the maintenance man said, "Yeah, I think I know what apartment that is." The investigator then took me back to the substation where my mom was waiting. I went to the hospital and was getting ready to have a sexual assault exam done. While I was waiting for the exam, an investigator came in with a photo lineup. From the information that I had given them about the apartment, his dentist, his doctor, all of this information that I'd gathered while I was in his apartment, they were able to identify my captor. They brought me a photo lineup. I immediately identified him and found out my captor's name was Richard Markovonitz, and he was not in his apartment. He was officially on the run. Law enforcement was searching his apartment during this time, and they found some pretty disturbing information. They found a lockbox in his apartment that contained a lot of materials, but most notably were newspaper clippings about 3 homicides in Virginia in 1996 and 1997. Law enforcement immediately notified the task force for those 3 homicides, and they responded to collect evidence. Meanwhile, they're obviously on the hunt for my captor. They have very little information about where he is, but eventually his sister calls and says that she's supposed to meet him in Florida. They had been tracking his cell phone at the time, triangulating his location and watching him move down I-95 from South Carolina towards Florida. He's supposed to be meeting his sister at a restaurant, so they have a law enforcement officer sitting there waiting to intercept him. He pulls into the restaurant, gets spooked, and goes on the run. There's a short police chase with speeds up to or over 100 miles an hour that ends when law enforcement deploys stop sticks. The car obviously wrecks. They send in a canine to apprehend him, and at that point, he has a weapon in his hand and takes his own life there on the side of the road in Sarasota, Florida. His story more or less ends there, but mine just started. While this is a story that many of you know me for, it's not all of who I am. It's not something that defines me. It is something that shaped my life, but it's not the shape of my life and who I am. I'm a lot more than just the girl who was raped. Following my captor's death, he was positively identified as the person responsible for the homicides of Katie and Kristen Lisk and Sophia Silva in Virginia. I went on to form relationships in law enforcement, which led to a career in law enforcement. I worked for Richland County Sheriff's Department, which was the agency that investigated my case all through high school and college. When I graduated college, I became a fully sworn deputy at Richland County Sheriff's Department. I worked as a school resource officer and then as an investigator investigating sexual assault and child abuse cases, and finally as a victim's advocate up until the birth of my first child. So that's the broad scope of my story.
Let's talk about the after, because I get a lot of questions about the after. So what was it like going back to life after? So for me, I very much wanted my life to go back to normal. I didn't want anybody to treat me any differently. Obviously, everyone had had their own issues with that. So, like my mom wanted to protect me, for instance. And then more or less that me not wanting to talk about things, like, I get this out of my face, gave other people no space to talk about things as well. So like my friend, my boyfriend, my parents didn't feel like they could talk to me about what was going on because I didn't want to. It's not that I didn't want to talk about it. I just didn't want them to treat me any differently. I wanted them to treat me like they had before. So it was challenging, but not in the ways that you would expect. I don't feel like I had PTSD. PTSD is generally characterized by symptoms that last a long time. And my stress, anxiety symptoms, like my anxiety attacks, things that I did have afterwards, they didn't really last longer than 6 months. So that's really normal for when you're coming out of a traumatic situation. That's a normal time frame. So I didn't really have PTSD or nightmares or anything. I still don't. Every so often, pretty rarely, maybe once or twice a year, I'll have a dream that kind of is me reliving part of it, but they're not necessarily traumatic. I think it's just my brain trying to process after I talk about it or things like that, trying to put things in its place, if that makes sense. I'm not scared to go out in public, not scared to travel by myself, mostly because I think a great part of our personal safety is situational awareness and trying to keep yourself out of risky situations. That is not victim blaming. Please do not misunderstand that. It's just, if you feel nervous, know that there's things that you can do to keep yourself safe. I talk about that quite a bit here. So if you're not new here, then you will not be surprised by me saying that. So that's kind of my take on that. I feel like because of the way I handled my trauma, which is I dissociated, I just kind of compartmentalized it. There weren't actually emotions encoded. And so I don't tend to have an emotional response to sharing my story. I don't tend to have an emotional response to like being quote unquote triggered. It tends to be like in my body when I have experiences. I don't feel like I treat my children like overly safe or overly like helicoptery. I don't feel like I'm overly cautious. I think the way I treat my children is very reasonable considering I am in this job. I think it has made me more cognizant of the bad things that can happen, not like overprotective, if that makes sense. What other questions do I have about? I always get the questions, am I still friends with my friend from 2002? We're not friends. We just don't talk a lot. It's been 22 years. A lot of things change and people grow apart. I broke up with my boyfriend at the time. That's like another question after people watch the movie, especially like the younger crowd. They ask like what happened. In short, because I was dissociated, because I was like not feeling things, that included within my relationship with him. And so I just kind of like iced him out more or less. And we broke up a couple months later, but like he did the documentary. So like at the last minute, I called him and was like, hey, would you have any interest in doing this? And he's like, absolutely, I would do it. So you can say we're still on friendly terms. He's married, has a beautiful wife and son. What else? What other questions do I get a lot? I get all the time, like, should you have run? And that's not from like a armchair quarterbacking position, just people asking for advice if they get in situations. The statistics generally say that if you do fight someone who tries to take you, they will not. But two issues with that is when you're dealing with a sociopath, you really just don't know what they're going to do. And then the other issue is that you might not be able to run. Like your body might decide to freeze or to appease, or, you know, you don't know what your response is going to be. So statistically, that is the best option. But, you know, I hesitate to say do that because you might not be able to. I think that's pretty much it. I talked about how I went to work in law enforcement. People often want to know how I got out of it. I had kids. My husband traveled a lot and I was having babies and I didn't want to go to work. I wanted to be home with my babies.
Am I in the wrong for not wanting to go to my sister's wedding after she secretly dated my fiance and got engaged to him? Story time. So I was engaged to my ex-fiance, who we'll call Steve, for 2 years. We were together for 5 in total, and we were supposed to get married last summer. And about 3 months before the wedding, I found out he had been cheating on me with someone. It was honestly devastating, as I'm sure you can imagine, and I called off the wedding immediately. Steve moved away shortly after we ended it, and I thought that was that. I thought he'd be gone from my life. Little rat. And honestly, I was absolutely heartbroken, but slowly but surely, I've moved on with my life. We fast forward to last month, I get a call from my sister. My little sister, who we'll call Amy. She says she has exciting news and she wants to come to my parents' house to tell everyone what it is. And that's when she drops the absolute bombshell that she is engaged to Steve. My head was spinning. What makes this all so much worse is that my parents had known for months. They had not told me to protect my feelings, and they actually thought I would feel happy for them eventually. Amy tried to justify it by saying her and Steve had fallen in love after we broke up. I don't think that makes it any better, babe. And on the spot, I told them that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with their wedding, and I stormed out. Since then, Amy has been bombarding me with calls saying that true love is hard to find and it's rare, so when you find it, you gotta keep it. Well, girl, I tried to keep it, but he cheated on me, so now the wedding is in a couple of months, bearing in mind this is only a year after he was supposed to marry me. My parents are threatening to cut me off financially if I don't attend her wedding. And to add insult to injury, Amy recently asked me to be her maid of honour. Are you dumb in the brain? Amy, what the heck? Good idea. What the? These stories, man, they cause my stress levels to rise. She thinks that this will help rebuild our relationship. Now, the request has left me really torn. So what do you think I should do?